of the co-founders of Doing Sociology, an academic blog dedicated to promoting sociological consciousness among young students. Padgiri is also the convener of the ad hoc group of 05 of ISS that focuses on food, culture, and society. Interested scholars joining us today can explore more about this group and may join the same. Today, Dr. Padgiri will be speaking on critical reading, interpreting socially significant events, and developing literature review. Over to you, Rituparna.
Thank you, Dr. Gargi and Dr. Maureen, for giving me this opportunity. Let me also thank KK Handek State Open University for giving me this platform and bringing us all together. So before I begin, I'll share my screen. I have a PPT. Okay, I think sharing screen is not enabled. Is it possible to give me the rights to share my screen?
I made the co-host.
Okay, yeah, now I think it should be.
Can you? Are you being able to do it now? Okay, okay.
Yes. So my screen is visible to everyone, right?
It's visible.
Yes, ma'am.
You may use the slideshow option, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm just doing that, yeah. Okay. So, yeah. The topic for me today is to speak about critical reading, interpreting socially significant events, and developing a literature review. When we think about a literature review, automatically, the mind gets a little bit boggled because it means that one has to read and review the pre-existing literature. And as the name suggests, it's not a very easy task. On top of it, if you're thinking about critical reading and also interpreting socially significant events, it's a lot of things that one has to unpack and pack. I'm going to try my best in the next 45 minutes or so to give an overview of how to do this. And I will actually be using examples from my own research so that it is easier for people to connect to what they are doing and try to do a more demonstrative kind of exercise here. So let me begin by just refreshing everyone's minds in the post-lunch session, as I have collected two memes and put them together here, which shows how literature review is usually regarded, that not anybody in particular is a fan of writing a literature review. In fact, so many of us who have been students, as well as so many of us who are students even now, would want to avoid writing a literature review as much as possible. I'm currently supervising some MA projects and dissertations, and all of them are very brilliant, bright students who constantly ask me, ma'am, is the literature review necessary? So essentially, the idea is that if there is a possibility to not do it, let's not do it. I feel that a lot of these ideas about the literature review stems from the fact that we don't see it as an enjoyable part of doing research and something that is just a fragment of it that needs to be done with or dealt with. The idea is to change that. The idea is to make literature review exciting, as well as something that possibly rings a bell in terms of usefulness as well as what it could lead to, right? So let me begin with a little bit of discussion on what critical thinking is. Now, when one looks at the world around us at the moment, there is a huge attack on social sciences worldwide, including in global south countries like India. One of the main reasons why this has happened so is because of what social sciences practice, which is in a way critical thinking. So, if we are using this phrase critical thinking, it's also important to ask what critical thinking itself is. There have been several sociological works on critical thinking itself. And since I am a sociologist, I'll restrict myself to talking about more or less sociological arguments. And one of the ways in which we have tried to think about criticality is that it is the ability to create logical arguments based on the sociological imagination. Now, what is this sociological imagination? I'm sure that there have been two sessions before me in which the sociological imagination must have come up, and you also have your own ideas. But let me very quickly say that it is the ability to connect your own personal sufferings and your personal context to the larger biographical and the historical ideas of what the society is. So essentially, let me give you an example. When we were dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of us felt very disgruntled. There was so much disgruntlement as well as ideas about how the social is being impacted. A certain gloominess surrounded us in terms of our lives. However, a lot of people who did research on the pandemic also told us that this was not the first time in world history that a pandemic like this has happened. Pandemics have been a part of world history. And what the COVID-19 pandemic sort of did was contextualize this idea of epidemics and pandemics and tell us how social lives have changed when there have been these, events and incidents as well as times where it has been extraordinary and not normal. Now, critical thinking, in a way, makes us see one event like the COVID-19 pandemic as part of a larger whole and contextualize it for an understanding of it in a social historical sense. For a lot of us, it is also important that sociologists therefore engage with the historical perspective, primarily because while we feel that the contemporary is important, it is no way possible to understand the contemporary without looking at the historical. At the same time, critical thinking is also the process of reasonably deciding what to do and or believe. Now, reason by itself is a much contested term, especially in social sciences, including in sociology. But when we are thinking about one of the ways to biases at bay when we are thinking about something, whether or not it is rational. Now, for sociologists, again, keeping your own biases outside the jurisdiction of what you do is a very tough job, primarily because we are dealing with the social, the society, as well as things that are very familiar to us. So it's not really easy. For instance, one of the major understandings of social life is through the family. But how does one even think about the family without thinking about one's individual connection to it? So that familiarity that is rooted in that social institution is very difficult for some of us to sort of, do away with when we are thinking about it critically. For instance, I taught this course, Families and Intimacies, to undergraduate students in the University of Delhi. And one of the major pedagogical explorations from that course was how students would tell me that, what is being told about the family sociologically makes them very uncomfortable because they don't want to go back to families, primarily because now they see the multiple problems within it. Similarly, for women, when you think about ideas of gender, ideas of how gender permeates each and every institution as well as ceremony that we are part of, it makes us think about our own positions in society. So that is what critical thinking does, and which is why it is also said that there is a development of deep professional competence as well as a very sophisticated ethical judgment. This ethical judgment is not about judging whether or not something is morally superior, but to be able to make a judgment in terms of how you see features, characteristics of societies on their own right. So, for instance, if you find communities practicing marriage in the way that you do not, it is not the job of a sociologist or a critical thinker to judge it, but rather understand it in that context, right? So I can talk all day about critical thinking, but since I don't have that kind of time, I'm just going to sum up in terms of what I want to highlight in terms of creating and writing a literature review. So, what is this interrelationship between critical thinking and social sciences? Like I said, that the sociological imagination, as C.W. Mills would say, is the very root of how we understand sociology operating in terms of a critical thought. Now, this critical thinking also makes us question familiar ideas and objects like the family, like issues of gender, caste, religion, class, things that are very basic to us in terms of our mental and emotional functioning. I also feel that critical thinking is very crucial for what we call public sociology. Now, public sociology, as Michael Burrow would argue, is the use of sociology for the good of the larger public. Now, if we do not possess a kind of critical thinking, it is also difficult to be involved in decision making that can actually have large and long term implications at the societal level. So, a lot of sociologists, social scientists are involved in policy making, and that I feel is the application of your disciplinary training at a level in which you are contributing to a larger good. However, that is not the only aspect of public sociology. Let's also understand it in terms of what can happen in smaller settings like classrooms. So, for many of us, the classroom is actually the space in which we can make a significant difference in terms of critical thinking, primarily because not all of us will be policymakers or be involved in committees as well as larger decision making. But the classroom is one space where one has at least 40 or 30 students to whom one can communicate. Now, critical thinking is also something that tells us that this teaching learning process is not actually a monologue, but a dialogue, which means that the pedagogical innovation and the way the thinking operates, it is built through some of these core activities that are taken for granted, like listening, reading, discussing, writing, and questioning. So, all of us are aware of the fact that children, particularly when they are young and they just start speaking, ask a lot of questions. It is seen as adorable and at some times also annoying. However, that is actually the root of what we see as curiosity. Now, for many teachers, questioning becomes a way of engaging with students. You may also say that many discourage questioning because they do not want to be questioned at all. However, for critical thinking to be built, it is very important within a space like the classroom to have that kind of comfort level where there is possibility of engagement with the teacher in terms of also pointing out that there could be moments in which the pedagogue is wrong, and that is the development of critical thinking. Now, when we are also thinking about critical thinking, I must point out that when you are students who have finished post graduation and are thinking about doing a PhD, or you're already PhD students, you think about specializations and you think about research areas, which is the absolutely right or the correct thing to do. But at the same time, the critical thinking part of it is not honed if one doesn't keep engaging with literature in their larger subsequent fields as well. So if you want to work on cinema or you want to work on food, it's very good because these are all ways in which you can engage with the social. But to say that I don't want to engage with any other writings or discussions talks on, let's say, ecology or political economy, or digital sociology, or maybe something very different like a historical sociology, it automatically means that you are restricting yourself to a cocoon, which is the cocoon of your own field in this context, and that causes more harms than goods. The reason being that for the critical thinking to be developed in an adequate way, it is very necessary that you contribute and engage and listen to diverse ideas. So, for many interdisciplinary settings, and nowadays universities are primarily interdisciplinary, where you have a lot of departments, centers coexisting, it is useful to attend discussions in other centers. Many a times, the way people speak about something that you just may not know anything about actually opens up newer ideas of thinking. Now, I'll carry this train of thought forward to actually talk about the literature review, and it's sort of an opportune connection between how I think about critical thinking and literature review. So, again, this is a question that very often comes up. How do I choose a topic? What is a research topic? How does one come about it? So the idea is that a research topic is not something which is available for sale on Amazon, right? Or it is also not something which someone can give it to you. Actually, even if I give you a research topic today, it could be very well that it doesn't work out because of a number of factors. For me personally, research is about two major things. One is feasibility, whether or not you're able to execute a particular research. And the second point is about passion, whether or not you care about any topic. Because without a combination of the two, it is very difficult to execute a research. So the literature review is actually an interesting way to think about any research topic. And it sort of answers this question about how do I find a research topic. So if you read and if you review existing literature, you will find some topic. So, like I said in the beginning itself, I want to give some examples from my own research so that, it is possible for you to make an interconnection between the researcher's personal world and then the social world as well. So, during my MPhil, as I was trying to figure out a topic, actually, before the MPhil, as I was trying to, finish my MA and write the MPhil entrance, this question of research topic definitely comes up. And I was thinking, what should I do my research on? Now, during those days, I had also spent some time after my master's at home, making, tea for guests, cooking some meals. And there were a lot of comments about, how enjoying cooking was a good thing for me because it would help me in my future life. The indication being that if you enjoy household chores like cooking, you will make, a good daughter-in-law or a good wife. Now, those comments irritated me, I cannot lie, but at the same time, they made me think about this relationship between food and gender. And what I did was did a little bit of research on what kind of sociological insights are available on that. And then I realized that this is something which can be taken ahead for a research topic. So that's a very preliminary way of choosing a topic, something which might just be there with you or have impacted you without you even thinking about it in, a very deep manner. But that the idea is to take it ahead in a way in which you formulate that research idea. So I started thinking about it, and one of the best ways to collect the material for literature review is then to use keywords to do these Google searches. So in those times, Google and the internet was still not as in use as it is today. So I went a lot to the Ratan Tata Library in Delhi School of Economics, my alma mater, and where I was doing my MA, collected books by doing these keyword searches. That can I find something on food? Can I find something on gender, kitchen, domestic work? So this is one way in which you can just begin with Google itself now, where you do a preliminary search. The next idea is to think about the nature of research that you want to do, because the literature review has to be collected accordingly. So let's say you want to do a field-based study. So what you should also keep in mind is to collect literature in which such kinds of field-based studies may have already been done in different kinds of contexts. So one of the mistakes I would say that most of us make is to come back and say that there is hardly any literature available in this particular area. And we think that this is a very, significant point. However, in research terms, that is not how it should be done, primarily because literature is available, maybe not exactly related to one particular field that you have chosen or that field site that you are talking about, but many similar studies are done, across the world. So when I was collecting data about this relationship between food, work, and gender, I realized that it was not just in India, but in many parts of the world where those kinds of studies had already been done, including in Italy, in Ghana, in Senegal, in the US, in UK, and so all of these become a part of your literature review. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the literature review is very, very comprehensive. It is not just about your own field site. So if you are taking the field site as Guwahati, or let's say as Nalbari or Tejpur, it's not about research that has been done in these areas. It's actually about research that has been done on the theme and in a comprehensive geographical context. The next part is equally important because we are looking at a reciprocal relationship between the research topic and the methods. Now, this is not within the purview of this presentation, but let me make a very quick observation about the fact that we cannot decide our methods to collect data until and unless we know what our research topic is, what our literature review is. Now, many students will face this question and they struggle a lot that how do I know what is the research gap? I need to find the research gap. Well, one cannot find a research gap if one doesn't read the literature, right? So if you don't read the literature, it's very difficult to find any kind of gaps in it. And that is why the literature review is the most important part of a research. Now, I talked about making literature review exciting, and why that is required is because many a times we have this impression that we read the literature and we summarize, and that is what the writing of a literature review is. Well, it is not actually. Yes, it is a survey of previously published research on a topic, but it at the same time should give an overview of the current thinking on the topic. So primarily, if let's say someone does a literature review of how street food has evolved in India, the literature review cannot really begin with talking about the rise of street food stalls post 1990s. It has to begin with the direction in the sense that food and caste are interconnected. So this is very old literature that has been in existence since the early 1900s, where many sociologists as well as social anthropologists have spoken about the relationship between food and caste. And that is one major reason why probably street food stalls in many parts of the country haven't really existed in the way that you see them now, because of how caste has dictated how we eat out. So therefore, as soon as one looks at the list of bibliography or references, there should be some sort of idea of engaging with historical and also contemporary scholarship. So it shouldn't be one of the cases where you're only engaging with very old or very new scholarship. I also agree that literature review does not really contain new results, but it can lead a researcher towards new inferences based on the combined findings of previous research. So we read the existing literature to know what has been already done and then what is left for us to do, and at the same time also to think about what that has been done can tell us. Because let's say sometimes we have this idea that this happens in this part of the world and we feel that it is a unique characteristic. Doing a literature review will tell us that it's probably not, and there is a social pattern that actually explains the existence of certain rituals. So for the longest time I was of this opinion, mistakenly, that what happens in terms of menstruation rituals in Assam is a very unique thing. Gradually, when you read up on menstruation rituals all over the world, you realize that it actually reflects only a pattern of how menstruation is imagined and thought in the larger social context. So that is the difference between, critically reading something and then, arriving at a conclusion. Now, I wanted to share this from Current Sociology Review, which is one of the most established journals in sociology, primarily to tell you why the literature review should be taken seriously. So, if you see, Current Sociology Review publishes different kinds of review articles, as the first point says, and you see that then they explain what kind of reviews they publish. One is, the description says, reviews of key sociological concepts. Then there are new discussions and topics in sociology, right? And in the last larger point, you see that they're also interested in reviews that discuss regional or national specific production, which, when connected and discussed and in discussion with more global issues, would be more welcomed. Now, when you read this description, it is really clear that a journal of the caliber of Current Sociology Review is looking for articles which are primarily review based. So again, a lot of questions about, can the literature review be published? Is it worthwhile? Apart from the fact that it is a collection of what has been written, the answer is always yes. Because if you're doing your review well in terms of any literature, there is a multitude of scope and possibility to engage with existing literature in the global context, like I was saying, and publish in it in the manner of articles. So this is a more productive, or rather a productivity oriented perspective that I'm offering. But in a way, it's also an incentive for researchers to take their literature review very, very seriously. I have myself found it to be very useful that if you do a thorough literature review, you spend time doing it, it actually enhances the quality of your research, primarily because you're able to answer any and every question about your own research, right? So I'm going to move on and show you an abstract of this very famous paper on social capital, its origins and applications in modern sociology, by Alejandro Portes, which was published in another acclaimed journal in sociology, Annual Review of Sociology. Now, why I wanted to share this is because of the title itself. If you see social capital, its origins and applications in modern sociology. Social capital, as many of you will know, is a conceptual tool developed by French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. But this paper by Alejandro Portes discussed the way that the concept originated and then has been applied in modern sociology. So in a way, this is not an empirical paper per se. By empirical, I mean a fieldwork or a data-based research. It is an engagement with a conceptual tool, which is social capital in this sense, and then providing examples of how social capital operates within modern sociological context. So it is actually a review article which engages with a particular concept, right? It is not engaging with a particular review of literature in terms of a theoretical trend, but a concept, but then using it to discuss how it has played out in the context of modern sociology. So essentially, this is one more way of engaging with literature, that you engage with concepts and how concepts have been used in different parts of the world, right? Why do a literature review? I think I have already said a lot about it, but just to sum up, it helps us provide a comprehensive foundation on a topic. explains the current state of knowledge, highlights the main methodologies and research techniques, and also helps us identify gaps in existing studies, which will lead us to those potential future researchers. So these are some of the uses in which, we generally focus on why the literature review needs to be done. I also feel that when you're doing a literature review and you're reading literature that is aligned to your topic, look at their main methodologies and research techniques. What kinds of methods the data collector has used? What kinds of research techniques have been used? Primarily so that there is a possibility to know, that if there is an engagement with the method that you are proposing. So can you deal with, a concept like caste, which has been studied, extensively from a different kind of vantage point? Does that possibility exist? Now, the tough part, to say all of this and to say that write a literature review is actually the easier part, but how the happening of the writing happens, right? I think because most of us have time constraints, have a scope of your literature review and also the research questions that you will be answering at the back of your mind, in the sense that what exactly are you doing the literature review for? Is it a PhD research? Is it an MPhil research? I think MPhil no longer exists, so that question is moot. But let's talk about the PhD, that, how much time do you have? So what should be the scope of your literature review? In a PhD, as per my understanding goes, I feel that the literature review does need to have a global context. So if you're working on, let's say, being child-free in urban India, it is a very niche topic, and it came to my mind because one of my students that I know is working on the same. And to sort of locate it, you require a global perspective to explain why being child-free in urban India is even a topic that needs to be researched. So that is how you define the scope of your literature review. Then one should begin with an overview of the topic and give some context, explaining why this review of the topic is necessary. So even in a literature review, you just don't begin by saying that X and Y says so, Z and V says so. You first say that what is it that you are trying to review. So for instance, in my PhD on mobile theater of Assam, I was trying to understand if it is an example of the counter-public culture that exists in the world. So, which means that while writing the literature review itself, I first laid out that I'm going to provide some critical comments and insights on what the public sphere and the counter-public sphere are, and then draw the connections with modes of performance and subsequently with theater and drama. So when you're presenting the literature review, the descriptive summary is not all that makes it a review. You need a criticality, which is why I was talking about the critical thinking bit. So there are many researchers which will describe what has happened. But as a researcher, it is also the responsibility to go beyond the description to talk about what the critical lens tells us. So essentially, let's say that there is an observation that something which through readings of other kinds of material is not true. It is also your responsibility to bring in the contrary or the contradictory perspective. I'll give an example to explain this point better. So when I was doing the historical section in my thesis, my supervisor mentioned that, Rituparna, you should also look at some alternate histories. Now, when she gave me that suggestion, I actually did not understand her, and I thought, what is alternate history? But gradually, I realized what she meant, because when I looked at the bibliography, I saw that I had only cited historians from, a particular community till that time in my bibliography. And then I realized that my researcher's bias was very visible in the kind of history that I was reading. So then I went to local stores, bought local books written in Assamese, because I can read and write that language. And then I realized that there's also a different historical perspective that is offered through another vernacular language. So when I redid my historical literature review, I made it a point to include literature from English historians or histories written in English, what we call the nationalist perspective of history, and then also the local historical perspective. And immediately you see how history is interpreted and reinterpreted differently according to the context. So the literature review is supposed to bring out these contradictory studies. So it cannot be a monolithic, homogeneous kind of explanation. The most important point for today is also to know what kind of literature review is relevant and credible. And this is a point that I think needs a much larger discussion. But let me just say that when you're doing a review of your literature, focus on finding material which is published in scientifically peer-reviewed journals. So what is peer review? Peer review is when your article or what you publish and put out in the internet is read by members of your peer community before it is published. So it should not be a blog post which has no credibility. It should not be a Wikipedia entry. It has to be papers published in journals, books which are published by credible publishers, in which there is a thorough reviewing and editing process involved. Because primarily we are collecting knowledge, right? And knowledge is something which can be put together scientifically when there is some sort of engagement with what you see as validity. The last point has been helpful to me personally when we do the writing of a literature review is that you can have themes. So let's say that you are engaging in a study on domestic workers in Assam and looking at their class, caste, and religious dimensions. So the thematic divisions are very clear to you even before you begin, that you need literature on class, caste, and religion. So just for the sake of making writing easier, you can put them in sections on separate Word documents, and later when you edit, bring it together. So for a lot of researchers who are just starting this journey of writing is very, very daunting. It really, intimidates you. And sometimes you just are stuck without able to make connections. In those moments, having separate Word documents helps, so that if you have a point that you can put in one theme, just go ahead and do it. You can later on maybe delete it, edit it, but for the time being, you can put it in a thematic division so that that idea of writing actually takes place. These are also parts of the emotional way in which one engages with writing, which don't often get talked about because we are only looking at final outputs. But the literature review is something which is time consuming, and to make it as enjoyable as possible, these are only certain tricks that can help you in one way. Now, I used to do this a lot during my MPhil and PhD, that I would have a template, let's say, and then just put data in after my, reading. So in this template, what I have is, let's say, author, and I've chosen Levi Strauss, complicated author, but also one of my favorites. So, and then what kind of theoretical or conceptual framework he belongs to. So, structuralism. What is the research question or hypothesis that he is proposing, the methodology that he follows, and the analysis and results. So I would do it for all, thinkers that I'm reading. So if I'm reading Levi Strauss, I've done it for Levi Strauss. Then if I read Krishnendu Ray, I'll do it for Krishnendu Ray. If I read Karl Marx, I'll do it for Karl Marx. Now, this template, at the end of the day, it sort of makes it easier for me to sort of see in front of my eyes who has said what about something. Now, yes, this is a lot of work, but a research like a PhD or any other research is a lot of work, right? So this is the prerequisite or the template that you can use just to minimize, the level of thinking that goes into while writing. Then, what I meant by the thematic division of a literature review. So, how are food and structuralism connected? If I am reviewing this, these are the themes that I had for myself, within which I would want to fit in the review of literature as I was reading and then writing. So primarily, I begin with the influence of structural linguistics, Levi-Strauss, and then the study of food. So a more overview kind of a topic to begin with, and then go into the intricacies. Now, when you're looking at this, nowhere does it feel that it's just description. It is actually critically put together analytical content of what has been already published in terms of food and structuralism, right? So in the end, I had this section on structuralism and food in the Indian context, which means that after the overview and the global discussion, it is my work that I would want to contextualize within this pre-existing literature review. So an example of how to begin and how to write, like I was saying, the introductory paragraph. So it's really easy to just put in words that I want to discuss the various social meanings that food contains, which contributes to the relationship between an individual and the society. And I will attempt to understand the meanings that are attributed to food by using literature from the structuralist perspective, primarily the works of Claude Lévi-Strauss, Mary Douglas, and Rolla Barthes, who have been influential figures in developing this particular tradition. Now, this is a very simple introductory paragraph, but it gives the reader a lot of clarity in terms of what the author is proposing. It's very clear that the question is to understand the social meanings of food from the relationship between an individual and the society. I'm also clear about the literature that I'll be doing, which is from the structuralist perspective and the works of three thinkers. So in that sense, the next few paragraphs and these themes are easy for the reader to understand, right? That, okay, the author has laid out that they are going to do this, and this is how they will do it, right? How to quote from the text. Again, something which most of us struggle with, particularly when we have started, reading and writing. And is it just insertions or do you explain? I feel that if you use a quote from the text, like, the sentences in italics are indicative of the quote that I'm using from Levi-Strauss's work, The Raw and the Cooked, published in 1964. I have provided an explanation of why the quotation is necessary, right? So when I'm doing the literature review, I'm using an exact quotation or citation with an explanation of the necessary quotation. So that again makes it easier for the reader to locate what is being said. So instead of using only a random citation or quotation, it is useful to give an explanation beforehand, right? How do you take forward the theoretical argument? Again, what do you do in terms of after doing the literature review of these key thinkers? Now, if you go back to this para, I said I look at the works of Levi-Strauss, Douglas, and Barthes. Now, how do I take it forward? So I find that Levi-Strauss's conceptualization of the raw and the cooked has actually been useful in other studies like that of Dylan Clark, who uses the structuralist method to understand what is punk food and how it provides a resistance to the corporate capitalist ways of understanding junk food. Now, essentially, this means that there is an application of the concept of what Levi-Strauss understood in his original writings by someone called Dylan Clark, and then you can take it ahead like that. So let's say that you were thinking about looking at fermented foods in the context of Northeast. That itself would be a great way to go back to Levi-Strauss's understanding of the raw and the cooked, and then see how your work can be a departure from there, right? So you might think that there is not enough literature on it, and whatever has been done recently by people like Dolly Kikon and others. They are all important scholarship, but at the same time, the historicity is not about direct connection to the region that we see as Northeast India, but what has been conceptualized itself, right? So the idea is that you begin with the historical and then you take it ahead. Last point before I end, some to-dos. always maintain proper notes with proper citations. So when you start reading, and nowadays everything is computerized, most of you also read online, automatically remember to highlight the portions in the particular text that you think are important, put it in a separate Word document. Just give me a moment. Okay, my apologies about that. So, whenever you read something which you think will be important for your research, put it away in a separate Word document or the document in which you are making notes. Remember to put in the author and the year of publication, and if possible, also the page number, so that later on you don't have to keep going back to the text, but you can go back to your notes. That makes your job easier. You can also use thematic sections to arrange your notes, because again, this makes the writing easier. So all of this sounds like a lot of work, but trust me when I say that if you do this work at the back end, the writing actually becomes much easier. So I spent not a lot of time struggling to write, because the back end work was done in terms of the arrangement and then the reading. So whenever you are reading, read, put the reference in your a reference list, and then make the notes in a separate file. Keep it with the proper citation so that you can go back to it whenever it is required. And this is also something which is a lifelong process, because the PhD and the MPhil researchers are then used for subsequent paper publications, talks, presentations. You don't have to keep going back to what you read and what you didn't. You can use these ideas for a long period of time. Now, when you are doing the literature review, keep in mind two things, and these are my beginner's task. That first, you should or maybe begin by writing a review of the works of four key thinkers in your field, and you can use a historical or a comparative approach. So that makes an understanding of who the most important thinkers in your field are and what they have said very crystal clear, in terms of giving you opportunities to engage with contemporary scholarship as well as your own research. Then ask yourself this question: are sociological concepts used to illuminate and analyze the issue? Are you using the sociological, imagination? Does the writer indicate an awareness of historical, cultural, and social structural context? And how adequate is the logic of the argument? These questions should be asked to yourself when you finally read what you have written. One of the good ways to also practice it is by reading out, aloud. Many a times what you read makes a lot more sense when you're also reading it out loud. So do that and ask yourself these questions: that do I make logical sense? Am I indicating an awareness of how historically, culturally, and socially this knowledge has been produced? If I'm talking about caste in India, can I use the same way that caste is understood in the rest of the country to understand the context of Assam? If yes, why? If not, why? So keep asking yourself these questions when you are writing. I'm going to sum up with this thought that writing a literature review is one of the toughest parts of doing research, primarily because it forms the backbone of what one is doing. But at the same time, it is not also an impossible task. Everyone has been doing it, and people who have been doing research have been doing it. These are only some ways in which one can make their job easier, and then, make the process a little more enjoyable than, possible. Let me thank Dr. Gayan and Dr. Kalita for giving me this opportunity once again, and I'm happy to address any questions if you have.
Thank you, Rituparna. That was a wonderful session. We do have a couple of questions. I'll try to put it out a few. So So this is by Dr. Mayuk Das Gupta. So he asks, in grounded theory context, how is critical reading important and how can literature review be used for identifying gaps?
Okay, I think I'm going to take, Gargi, is it possible for me to take a bunch of questions together?
Yeah. I think you can check the chat box
Hmm.
yourself and whichever you are comfortable with. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, you can take it out. Actually, there are a lot of questions. I don't think, but I think you can post the ones that won't be answered in this session can be posted in our discussion forum. And like other sessions, we'll post it to our resource persons. And probably when there is time, enough time, probably they will be able to like respond to those. Am I right, Rituparna?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, that's why I wanted to sort of read through
yeah,
and see
yeah,
what are the, similarities
yeah,
in the questions.
yeah.
Yes, so one question that I would want to answer is about how extensive the literature review should be. I think, there's no correct way of answering it, but to say that the extensivest literature review that you're able to produce within the time constraint that we have is better. And I don't think that, restricting yourself to 5 years is a good job or a good idea at all. Like I said, that 5 years doesn't offer any kind of historicity to understanding any social issue. And therefore, when you are thinking about a literature review, by historical, what I mean is the something that goes way beyond 5 or 10 years. If one is doing a longitudinal study today, even then one is looking for data from 5 or 10 years back. So therefore, to do a literature review, you need to go back way beyond 5 years, right? Now, one more question that I see is, could you share strategies for approaching a literature review when the sources span different fields? Now, yes, this is an interesting question in terms of if there are different fields and what do you do? Ideally, if there is an interdisciplinary perspective at work, and in many departments and centers today we do have it, what one should do is go discipline by discipline. So let's say if you're thinking of climate change and vulnerability, this is something in which research has been done in anthropology, in geography, in economics. So what you can do is that you can read literature in all the three disciplines, and then if you are as you say, curious about adopting a sociological framework, say why sociologists haven't, or rather, what is lacking in terms of a sociological perspective. For instance, if one is working on midday meal, you will realize that there has been a lot of work on midday meal by economists, whereas surprisingly, sociologists have not really contributed to do the discussion. So, what is the sociological idea that can be brought in? So, to do a literature review, there is no other option but to read, to write a certain kind of review, which is why even if it is different kinds of disciplines, you will have to do that kind of reading. Okay. Is it possible to do a research with same research questions in a different geographical area? Yes, it is possible. Are these studies in the specific geographical area lacking, might be? See, when one thinks about a research gap, it is not that, this study hasn't been done in this particular area. That's not a very correct way to understand a research gap. A research gap is when some facet of the social has been completely unexplored. So it could have been explored in some other, context, but maybe not in the particular field site that you were looking at. So there is a possibility of incorporating literature from another field site, which you have read, to this particular one. But to say that it is a research gap is a bit of a stretch. You can say that that kind of methodological or theoretical idea hasn't been really implemented. I think I have already answered this question, which a lot of you are asking about how to determine which literature to review. That check for credible scientific sources published in journals and books which are seen and held in high regard by the community that you are part of. So every discipline will have certain journals, certain books, ideas, publishers which are seen as credible. So review the literature that has been published in those journals or books or publishers. At the same time, the vernacular and the local involvement is also important. So also keep a check on what kind of literature has been published locally. However, even then, go for verified local publishers and not ones which have a chance of turning out to be predatory. How much time do we have, Garbi?
I think 5-7 minutes you can take.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see.
If you find something very interesting, we can, I think we can engage with that.
Yeah, I'm just reading through. Yeah, I think I have answered most of the questions. If you think there's any other question which is, important, please let me know.
All right then. Does anyone want to put on your this one microphone and ask something? If not, we would like to wind it off. I'll sort of give you 2-3 minutes. If anybody wants to put on your microphone and ask
Hello, ma'am.
Rituparna anything.
Am I audible?
Otherwise, we'll take it out.
Hello,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Yes.
Myself Arunjit. I am a scholar. I already asked a question in the chat box. I have one more question adding to that. If we are going to identify a research problem, you already mentioned about we should have a research gap. It is not a gap in the geographical or geographical thing is not the one of the gap of the study. Some social element should be there. You mentioned like that, no? Can you if I don't know the time is allowed or not, can you explain in your research how you find out the gap with the help of that kind of readings and all? Uh, I don't know. It is not possible to this time. If it's possible, you can mention how you come up with your research find that gap in your study. It will be helpful for me to understand my own studies. How can I develop that thing?
Yeah, I think, there are many questions about the research gap, how to write, how to deduce arguments, how to align, how to write structurally. And I understand these are all very, very legitimate questions. And, these are the things that researchers and new writers especially struggle with, and they're very anxiety inducing. However, unfortunately, there is not one answer to this, and what I have tried to present today is also a toolkit that has worked for me at a level which I'm not sure can work for everybody else. But the simple answer is to read as much as possible. Once you feel that you have read enough, and I don't know what enough exactly is, it's a very difficult term again. But maybe after reading, at least 10 to 12 books, I'll say, and maybe 15 to 20 articles, you will feel that there is some sense of a research idea that forms in your head. For me, the research gap was highlighted by the fact that there was no particular work on mobile theater from a sociological cultural perspective. Whatever works have been done were from an economic point of view in terms of the industry that it is, its functioning in terms of an entrepreneurial model, and as well as descriptive studies. What I wanted to do was a very cultural sociological study, and that was the methodological gap that I found. And the second was in terms of the conceptual analysis that I was proposing. for this, it's also necessary to have long-term engagement with the field, which I had, because I have grown up watching mobile theater for the largest part of my life, and I have been a part of how these theater companies produce their plays and how they are staged. So that kind of engagement is also necessary. So which is why in the beginning itself I said that research is about feasibility and also passion. That passion is somehow rooted in the way that the personnel is involved in how the research can be taken ahead. I see a lot of questions about getting lost, about what to do when you are stuck. Again, these are all things that not just you, all of us have faced and still face. These are things that don't go away even when you are a very established scholar, or you may have written a lot. You will constantly face these. The only way out is to take a break, tell yourself that this shall too pass and it will happen. And it is actually, in that sense, the only way. Academia, research, writing, these are very tough, lonely journeys, which is why not a lot of people do it. As you know, that the minuscule portion of people who do it are also struggling with these issues all the time. And it is not just young early career researchers, it's also very established scholars. So unfortunately there is no shortcut. Even now, when I have said that I follow this template, I use these notes, I keep these citations, even then there are several problems that come up during the writing, and they will always come up. So essentially then there is no shortcut. Keep reading, keep writing, and yes, the struggle is definitely real. Unfortunately, I cannot offer a solution which will solve the issue at hand. Reducing arguments and finding arguments in literature. This is something that I wanted to, deal with in the PPT as well. And, that is why I said that starting with an overview and then moving into the specifics sort of help us in understanding where we are going from, the global and to then the national and the local.
Thank you, Rituparna. That was a wonderful session, and we love to have you again and again. And to all the participants, thank you for being with us this whole day. Tomorrow we shall meet you again at 10 a.m. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Gari.
Thank you so much.